She pressed the master key into my front door like it was hers. HOA policy, Patricia said, chin raised like a general inspecting the troops. Refusal to comply may result in fines or forced access under emergency protocol. I didn't flinch. You might want to stop there. She blinked, just once, just long enough for me to pull the door open before the lock could turn. I helped draft Florida Statute 720. It doesn't give you the authority to touch this lock, let alone use a key on it. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Michael Landry, retired property lawyer, 31 years. This house isn't just a roof over my head. It's the last place my wife ever smiled. I stepped outside, letting the screen door ease shut behind me. We planted a live oak in the backyard before her diagnosis. When she couldn't stand anymore, I built her a bench under it. She died 6 weeks later. Patricia's smugness thinned. I let the silence drag until her eyes flicked downward, just for a second. So no, I said. You don't get a key to my house. You don't get to violate what's sacred just because you're on some board. And if you try again, you'll wish your bylaws were written in crayon. Where are you watching from? Because Patricia Hensley just picked the wrong man to screw with. And she hasn't seen what happens when a Marine's father decides to push back. She recovered quickly. Mr. Landry, the master key policy was approved by unanimous board consent. We've already collected keys from 42 households. I nodded slowly, as if I hadn't just felt that number punch the side of my stomach. Then I hope they know their rights better than you do, because you've just opened a legal can of worms. Her smile tightened. You're welcome to bring it up at the next board meeting. Oh, I will. She turned and walked down the path, clipboard swinging with each step like a threat. I shut the door, heart pounding, not in fear, but in fury. I walked through the living room, past the mantel where Sarah's photo still sat between a folded flag and a shallow dish of her seashells. Every inch of this home was a mosaic of her, hand-painted tiles around the kitchen window, the hummingbird feeder still hanging where she could see it from the old love seat. When the doctors said she had 3 months, she asked to die here, not in a hospital, not sedated into silence, right here. I honored that. And now Patricia thought she could put her grubby HOA policy hands on our lock? Not a chance. I headed out back, down the worn stepping stones that curved to the oak. The bench I built still sat under its shade, varnish faded by the sun. I ran my hand along the armrest, her favorite blanket used to rest there in spring. I sat down slowly, felt the wood creak under my weight. What would she say if she were here? Probably something like, "Don't get arrested, Mike. But don't let them win." The truth was, this wasn't just about one policy or one door. It was about control. Patricia had been flexing for months, restricting colors on garage doors, sending citations for flower beds that looked unmanaged, even finding a family for a trampoline they had had for years. But this key stunt, that was different. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about access, about power, and it crossed a line I couldn't unsee. My son Evan was flying in tomorrow. The Corps had released him last month. Honorable discharge. He didn't say much over the phone, but I could hear the tension behind his silences. I knew that feeling too well, coming home to a world that felt smaller than the one you fought in. I wasn't going to let this place feel like a battlefield. Not for him, not for me. I stood up and looked back at the house. Patricia had no idea she'd walked into a legal minefield, and I'd be damned if I let her bulldoze this community unchecked. She wanted to test authority. She was about to learn what happens when it collapses under the weight of the law. By the next morning, the HOA clubhouse bulletin board looked like a war map. A fresh notice had been tacked on overnight, bold red lettering across the top. Mandatory compliance reminder. Master key submission required within 72 hours. Below that, the threat of fines, loss of amenity access, and legal escalation danced across the bottom like it had teeth. I stood there staring at it, while a few neighbors hovered nearby, murmuring in low voices. None of them looked me in the eye. One woman with 2 kids turned away quickly, clutching her folder of forms like it might shield her. They were folding. All ready. I turned to leave when a hand tapped my shoulder. "Mike." It was Gerald, retired electrician, probably in his mid-70s now. His face looked heavier than the last time I saw him. "You gonna give him a key?" "Not a chance." He let out a breath. Didn't think you would. I haven't yet either. But my wife's nervous. She says Patricia told her the board could revoke our parking tags if we're non-compliant. He gave a bitter chuckle. It's like we're in kindergarten again. We both looked back at the notice. There were already 8 clipped envelopes beneath it. Neighbors who'd submitted copies of their keys. 8 homes compromised. She's bluffing, I said. None of this is enforceable. But no one wants to be the first to call that bluff. That's when I realized it. This wasn't about rules. It was about fear. Patricia was playing a psychological game, and most folks in the neighborhood didn't know enough about HOA law to push back. I left the clubhouse and made my way toward the east side of the community where the O'Connors lived. Their daughter had autism, and last year the HOA tried to fine them over a backyard privacy screen they'd installed to help reduce sensory triggers. Patricia had dropped the issue when a local news outlet caught wind, but the damage stuck. I found Mr. O'Connor raking leaves near his porch. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Michael, you hear about the notice? I am. You planning to hand over your key? He scoffed. Only over my dead body, but Patricia sent us an email saying they'd assess daily fines and block us from using the community pool. She doesn't have that power. The bylaws don't grant the board that kind of authority. Doesn't matter if no one else knows it, he muttered. They think if they push hard enough, people will just cave. That was the second time in an hour I'd heard the same truth. People were scared, not convinced. This wasn't compliance. It was quiet surrender. Back at my house, Evan had just arrived. He dropped his duffel bag by the door and looked around with that weary scan soldiers get after too many flights and not enough sleep. But when he saw me, his posture straightened. Hey, Dad. I pulled him into a hug. Welcome home. He didn't let go right away. There was a stiffness in him, like the muscles were doing the work, but his brain hadn't caught up to the fact that he wasn't on alert anymore. You okay? He nodded. Working on it. I didn't push. He'd talk when he was ready. We sat at the kitchen table later that evening. I told him about Patricia, about the key, about how she'd tried to open the door herself. He didn't move for a long time. Finally, he said, She touched the lock? Didn't get it open, but she tried. His jaw clenched. You know, he said slowly, if someone did that on base housing without a court order, it'd be considered unlawful entry. Doesn't matter if they had a title or a badge. You don't mess with a locked door. That's exactly what I'm thinking. What's the plan? I've got a few ideas, but I need to know what the rest of the board thinks. And who's still afraid of her. Evan leaned back, arms crossed. I'm not. And if she comes near that door again, I'll be the one opening it. I smiled, but there was a chill in my chest. This wasn't just legal anymore. It was becoming personal for him too. And that meant I needed to act before this turned into something bigger than it had to. Tomorrow, I'd go to the next board meeting, and I'd pay close attention, not to what Patricia said, but to who didn't speak at all. The HOA board meeting took place in the community center's multi-purpose room, a beige, soulless space that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and plastic folding chairs. Patricia sat at the front, gavel resting in front of her like she fancied herself judge, jury, and executioner. I took a seat near the back, flanked by Evan on my right and Gerald on my left. A dozen other homeowners filtered in, eyes darting more than, faces lifting. I noticed 2 new names on the agenda board, a landscaping variance and a community safety update, which I knew was Patricia speak for her master key stunt. She called the meeting to order, eyes sweeping the room with manufactured calm. We'll begin with old business, she announced, tapping the gavel. Then move to matters of safety and access. As always, the board appreciates your cooperation in keeping our neighborhood secure. A few people nodded, most sat still. I scanned the table. There were 4 other board members beside her. Only one wouldn't meet her eyes, Diane Mallory. She was in her early 40s, light brown hair tucked in a low twist, and a folder held tightly to her chest like it might bolt if she didn't keep squeezing. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But when Patricia mentioned the unanimous vote that had supposedly passed the master key policy, Diane's shoulders twitched. That was the tell. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. A tension in her spine, a look sideways, a swallow that came too fast. She knew. That vote hadn't been unanimous. Maybe it hadn't happened at all. I leaned slightly toward Evan. Left hand end of the board. Watch her. He didn't look directly, but I saw his chin shift just enough. "Not sold," he whispered. "Nope." Patricia breezed through the landscaping issue and then stood to address safety. As most of you are aware, the HOA has instituted a key retention policy. This ensures we can respond quickly to emergencies, gas leaks, fire risk, suspicious activity, without delay. Our legal counsel has assured us this falls within emergency override provisions already embedded in our charter. Embedded in our charter, that was a cute phrase. But that's not how law worked. The majority of homeowners have already complied, she continued. Those who haven't will receive a second notice, and failure to comply within 72 hours may result in community access restrictions. I raised my hand. Patricia hesitated, then nodded, tight-lipped. "Mr. Landry, can you cite which section of the bylaws authorizes the board to demand house keys?" There was a pause. She didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "It falls under our emergency enforcement authority, which is outlined in—" "I didn't ask what it falls under," I said, standing. "I asked for the specific section number." A low murmur rippled through the room. Patricia's smile strained. "Our attorney has provided guidance that—" "So, not the governing document, then." I looked directly at Diane. "Mrs. Mallory, as board secretary, can you confirm whether a formal vote was recorded on this policy?" Her hands clenched the folder tighter. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Patricia cut in fast. "The vote was unanimous. Minutes were recorded and submitted." I didn't break eye contact with Diane. Her jaw twitched. Her foot tapped once beneath the table, then stopped. Silence stretched. Then she looked down. Not at Patricia. At her own lap. That was enough for now. I sat. Patricia shifted quickly to the next item, but the illusion was cracked. I could feel it. The room had changed temperature. Whispers bloomed at the edges of the meeting. After adjournment, Evan and I waited outside. Diane walked out 10 minutes later, alone. I didn't approach. I just stood in her line of sight, arms crossed, gaze steady. She glanced up, and for a single breath, her eyes locked with mine. Then she walked away. But her step faltered near the exit. Evan leaned closer. "You were right. She knows. She's going to break, just not tonight." "Soon?" I nodded. "Soon." 2 days later, I woke to the sound of a ladder scraping against the side of my house. It was 7:42 a.m. I was at the door before my coffee even finished brewing. Outside, 2 men in Navy HOA windbreakers were positioning themselves under the eaves, one hoisting a clipboard, the other fiddling with something metallic, what looked like a makeshift lock inspection tool. I stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The one with the clipboard didn't look up. "Just conducting a routine exterior safety inspection, sir. Standard procedure for non-compliant residences." "You mean retaliatory harassment?" I said, loud enough for both to hear. "You don't have jurisdiction to be on my property." Now he looked up. "The HOA has authority to assess structural safety. It's in the manual." "I've read the manual. I helped write the 2009 version this community still runs on. And unless you're here under county code enforcement or there's visible damage, you're trespassing." Evan came out behind me, hands in his pockets, but posture unmistakably military. "You need to get off this property, now." The men hesitated. The clipboard guy muttered something under his breath, then nudged his partner. They climbed down without another word. This was new. Patricia was done with notices. Now she was trying to intimidate. After they left, I checked the lock on the side gate. Fresh scrape marks. She was testing the boundary, seeing how close she could get before someone snapped. And she'd picked the perfect time, right after the meeting, while most people assumed everything was cooling off. But she'd made a mistake, because now I had something she couldn't walk back, an unauthorized inspection attempt with potential property tampering. That wasn't just intimidation, that was exposure. I went inside and started documenting everything, time-stamped photos, notes on their appearance. I even pulled the archived HOA manual from my desktop backup, highlighting the exact section that limited inspection authority to structural complaints reported in writing. No mention of unannounced patrols, no mention of entering property for lock checks. She was bluffing, harder than ever, but this time she'd left fingerprints. At 11:14 a.m., I got an email from admin at sunvaleliving.org. No subject line, no greeting, just a scanned notice. Final warning, master key non-compliance. Attached was a fine schedule that had magically appeared overnight. Daily fines starting at $50 and escalating by 20% per day, capped at $500 per incident. Patricia was moving fast now, too fast. Evan walked in as I was staring at the screen. She's panicking, I nodded. Or she thinks I will. She escalated after you challenged her in public. That tells me she doesn't have backup. Or worse, I said. She knows Diane could flip and she's trying to get ahead of it. Evan sat down across from me. What are you going to do? I need a copy of that vote record. Patricia claimed it existed. Diane's the only one who can prove it doesn't. He leaned forward. Then we push. Number, not yet, not directly. Instead, I printed the email, added it to the growing folder of materials, and wrote out a formal cease and desist. I sent it to the board via certified mail and included language citing Florida HOA statute limitations on inspections, unauthorized entry, and enforcement overreach. I knew she'd try to argue it, but that wasn't the point. The point was, this was now on record. The next step wasn't pressure, it was leverage. I circled back to Gerald, told him what happened. He winced, then surprised me. You're not the only one she pulled that stunt on, he said. She sent someone to the Tanner's place last week, claimed they needed to inspect for moisture intrusion. Lisa Tanner threatened to call the sheriff, and the guy left. I raised my brows. Did she document it? Lisa's got photos. I'll ask her if she'll talk. That was it then. We were past hearsay. Patricia was staging inspections she didn't have the legal standing to conduct, and if I could show it wasn't isolated, that it was systematic, the foundation she stood on would start to crack. But I still needed the missing link. Proof that the board never voted on the key policy. Diane had it. I just had to wait for her to feel the heat enough to hand it over. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept playing Diane's face over in my head, that flicker of hesitation, the clamped jaw, the folder hugged like armor. She hadn't agreed with Patricia, but she hadn't said a word either. By sunrise, I was in my study with a mug of burnt coffee and a legal pad full of notes. Patricia's email, the unauthorized inspection, Lisa Tanner's account, my own photos. All of it pointed to a pattern, but none of it mattered if the key policy had been properly voted into the bylaws. If it had, then she was just stretching the rules. If it hadn't, she was inventing authority, and that was actionable. I pulled up the HOA's digital document repository. Most homeowners didn't even know it existed, but I'd helped organize it a decade ago. I knew where the minutes were stored. Each board meeting had a PDF attached, uploaded by the secretary, Diane. I went straight to the last 6 months of records. March, landscaping budget. April, security cameras. May, pool repair. June, fence height variance. July, firework restrictions. August, nothing. September. That's when Patricia said the vote happened, but the file for September was missing. Every month before and after was there, but September was just a blank link. My stomach tightened. I clicked through again to be sure. Same result. A corrupt link wasn't proof, but it was suspicious. If the vote had happened, Diane would have filed the minutes. If it hadn't, or if she refused to sign off, Patricia might have buried it and just announced the policy as if it had passed. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping the desk. This was the crack I needed. And then, as if fate wanted to drive the point home, my printer whirred to life. Evan had cued something. He walked into the room a moment later, holding a protein bar and a look I recognized from his time overseas. Alert, cautious, waiting for orders. I just scanned this, he said, handing me a folded paper. Thought it looked familiar. It was the original HOA charter, the old copy, not the glossy reworded version Patricia had circulated last year. I flipped to Section 9, Board Authority and Limitations. Right there, in plain language. The board shall not demand physical access to privately owned dwellings without legal order, emergency response coordination, or express consent of the homeowner. No policy may override this clause without full membership vote, not board vote, membership vote, which meant every single homeowner in the community had to be notified and allowed to weigh in. Patricia hadn't done that. There had been no community ballot, no mailed notice, no online survey, just an email and a fake sense of inevitability. This wasn't just a bluff. It was an overreach so far outside her jurisdiction, it could dissolve her presidency. Evan leaned over the desk. That enough to move? Not yet. I need Diane's confirmation. What if she won't talk? I stared at the missing file on the screen. Then we proved there was no vote by showing there was no meeting, no minutes, nothing on record. And if she faked it? I shook my head. Too risky. Diane's sharp. If Patricia forged minutes, she'd never sign her name to it. That's criminal exposure. Evan nodded slowly. Then Diane's the pressure point. I stood, grabbed the original charter, and slipped it into a file sleeve. She just became our key witness. I made a copy of the September link error and logged the metadata. The absence of evidence was becoming its own kind of evidence. I needed Diane to speak, and something told me she already wanted to. I just had to give her the right moment and the right reason. I sat at the bench beneath the oak tree that afternoon, the original HOA charter in my hands. The same tree Sarah and I had planted before the world tilted sideways. The bench was weathered now, the stain worn away in streaks where her legs used to swing when she sat here waiting for hummingbirds. I used to bring her tea when she couldn't stand anymore. She used to smile and say, "This is what peace looks like." That peace was gone. And it wasn't just the threat of Patricia's policies or her clipboard cronies. It was the erosion of something deeper: trust, privacy, the right to say no in your own home. I stared at the clause again. Section 9. The one Sarah and I had fought for when the HOA was still forming, back when neighbors met over lemonade instead of threats. She'd believed in boundaries, and so did I. That's when the knock came, sharp, quick, purposeful. I walked back inside, still holding the folder. On the porch stood a woman in her 60s, clutching a folded piece of paper like it might disintegrate if she let go. Lisa Tanner. I hadn't seen her since the neighborhood barbecue last summer. "I heard from Gerald," she said quietly, "that you're pushing back." "I am." Her eyes scanned the front of my house, then landed on the front door. "They tried to open mine, too. Said they had reports of water damage on the east side of the property. We haven't had a leak in 5 years." "Did you take photos?" "Yeah, and I filed a police report, but they told me unless someone physically entered or broke something, it was a civil matter." I nodded. "It usually is. That's how HOAs get away with overreach. They operate in the gray." She held out the paper. "This is the letter they left after we told them to get lost. Might help." I took it. Another thinly veiled threat of fines and legal enforcement. The wording was near identical to what I'd received. "They're using a form letter," I muttered. "Trying to make it feel official." Lisa hesitated, then said, "If you're going after them, I want in." "You're not alone," I said, gesturing toward the stack of files on my table. "But I need more than witness accounts. I need the procedural records, the ones that prove this policy wasn't voted on." She tilted her head. "Diane?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Lisa gave a tight smile. "Good. She's decent. I think she's just scared." "She should be," I said. "She's sitting on a bomb." That night, Evan came in from a run, sweat on his collar and tension still bleeding off him like heat. "They were back," he said, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. "Who?" "HOA patrol. They slowed down in front of the house twice. Didn't get out, but they watched. They're testing us again. They'll push until they get a reaction." I opened the drawer and pulled out the letter from Lisa, slid it into a new evidence folder beside the charter and the email printouts. The pile was growing, quietly but steadily. "They think they're the storm," I said. "But they've never seen what a line in the sand looks like when it's drawn by someone who knows exactly how far the law will bend." Evan smirked. "You're going to bring it down, aren't you?" "Not all of it. Just the part that forgot it serves the people who live here." The bench outside sat silent under the stars. I stood by the window and watched its silhouette as wind moved the oak leaves in waves, like whispers from someone I still missed every day. Sarah would have told me not to go too far, to keep my heart ahead of my pride. But even she would have known this line had to be held. And the next time I spoke with Diane Mallory, she was going to understand that this was the moment. Either she helped, or she got buried with the rest of them. Diane Mallory showed up at my door just after 10 a.m. No email, no phone call, just her and a manila envelope clutched tight against her chest, like it might burn a hole through her if she held it any longer. I opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, looking over her shoulder, then crossed the threshold like she was entering a confessional instead of a living room. Evan stood in the hallway, arms folded, silent. She glanced at him and nodded, but her eyes never quite met his. "I don't have long," she said. "I told my husband I was going for groceries." I gestured toward the table. "Then let's not waste it." She sat, carefully placing the envelope in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the flap. "I didn't vote for it," she said quietly. "The key policy. It wasn't even on the agenda. I didn't move, just waited." "Patricia sent an internal email the night before the meeting," Diane continued. "Said she wanted to move fast and would log the vote afterward for continuity. But no one ever actually raised hands. There was no motion, no record. She typed the minutes herself. Then why sign off?" She looked up, jaw tight. "I didn't. That's why the September file is missing. I never submitted one." I felt a low thrum behind my ribs. It wasn't joy. It was confirmation, cold and final. "She's been printing out fake enforcement letters using your position as cover," I said, "stamping policies onto a community that never approved them. And now she's escalated to property threats." Diane pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a USB drive, a printout of the email Patricia sent, copies of board group texts, even a draft version of the minutes Patricia had tried to circulate, unsigned, unfiled. "You were right," Diane said. "It's a lie, and I'm done being part of it." I met her eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Shame. Like she knew her silence had stretched too far and finally snapped. "What made you come?" I asked. Her hands dropped to her lap. "She sent someone to our house." I felt my breath stop. She didn't know I was home, said it was an inspection. But I watched from the upstairs window. He walked the property line, tried the back gate. Her voice cracked just once. "That was it. I knew it wasn't about safety. It was about control." Evan stepped forward. "Do you want protection, legal or otherwise?" She shook her head. "I want her out." That was all I needed to hear. I slid the USB drive into my laptop. Files loaded quickly. Timestamps, email headers, metadata intact. This wasn't anecdotal. This was procedural fraud. I leaned back in my chair, the air around me suddenly sharp with clarity. "She's going to call an emergency session," I said. "Try to steamroll whatever narrative she's built. We need to be one step ahead." Diane nodded. "She won't expect me to speak." "She will now." Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't back down. "Tell me what you need." I outlined it cleanly. She'd forward the documentation to county property enforcement. I'd file a formal bylaw violation complaint, and together, we'd motion for a special election to remove Patricia under Section 11.4, abuse of board authority. As Diane stood to leave, I followed her to the door. "Thank you," I said. She paused, fingers on the handle. "I should have done it sooner." I didn't disagree, but I didn't judge her either. Some people need to feel the damage before they see it. As she disappeared down the sidewalk, Evan stepped beside me. "She's brave," he said. "She's scared," I replied. "But she's finally on the right side of the line." Now we had everything we needed: the records, the witness, the clause. Patricia's kingdom was made of paper, and I'd just found the match. I spread everything across the dining table like a general preparing for war. The original charter sat open on the left, Diane's USB drive plugged into my laptop on the right. Between them, printed emails, time-stamped photos, metadata screenshots, and the unsigned draft of Patricia's fake minutes formed the backbone of what I was building. Evan stood at the edge of it all, arms crossed. "You're building a case file. Not just a case," I said, "an execution plan." This wasn't about threatening Patricia anymore. It was about removing her, cleanly, legally, and without giving her time to spin a counter-narrative. People like her didn't respond to warnings. They responded to consequences. I started by drafting a formal motion for special election under Section 11.4 of the Charter. Any officer found to have willfully misrepresented procedural authority shall be subject to immediate removal by member vote, pending majority approval. By noon, I had a complete PDF binder with a front-page summary and an indexed appendix. Evan leaned over my shoulder. "How are you distributing it?" "Digital drop. Board members, county HOA oversight liaison, and the entire community." He raised a brow. You want them to see it before the board does? Number Y want them to see it at the same time. No chance for Patricia to control the narrative. I queued up an email draft with a neutral subject line. Urgent. Special election motion. HOA compliance review. And timed it to send at 7 a.m. the next morning, 2 hours before the board's emergency safety update meeting Patricia had scheduled. I knew she was planning to rally her remaining loyalists, maybe even push through a resolution to make the key policy retroactive. But by the time she hit the podium, the entire neighborhood would already know the truth. I walked out onto the porch, the evening heat clinging to my shoulders. Gerald was mowing his lawn across the street. He cut the engine and waved. I walked over. You hear about the emergency meeting tomorrow? I asked. Yeah, got the notice on my door this morning. No explanation, just a start time and a reminder that only compliant homeowners may speak. I smiled. That'll change by morning. He glanced at me. You got her, don't you? Paper trail's solid. By this time tomorrow, she'll be exposed. He nodded slowly. Took long enough. She played the long game. I just made sure the ending wasn't hers to write. He gave me a look that wasn't quite approval, but it was close. You need anything? Yeah, just one thing. What's that? When the vote comes, stand with me. He didn't hesitate. I will. Back at home, Evan had moved everything from the table into 2 labeled folders, digital submission and print backup. I'll run copies at the library in the morning, he said, just in case she tries to block access. She won't get the chance. I walked into my study, opened the drawer, and pulled out a black notebook Sarah had given me years ago. Inside was the handwritten outline for the original HOA charter we'd helped draft together. At the top, in Sarah's script, protect the people, not the power. She'd believed in community, in boundaries, in dignity. And tomorrow, I'd remind every single homeowner of that. This wasn't just about a lock. It wasn't even about me. It was about trust. And trust was about to make a comeback. By 6:30 a.m., the plan was already in motion. Evan loaded the box of printed evidence folders into the back of his truck, while I triple-checked the scheduled email delivery. The document package was airtight. Legal citations, record gaps, contradictions, and the exact clause that made Patricia's entire policy foundation collapse under its own weight. At 7 a.m., sharp, the email went out. Every board member, every registered homeowner, the oversight liaison at the county office, even the local neighborhood Facebook group administrator who'd promised me in a quiet message, if what you say is real, I'll post it pinned. Within 15 minutes, my inbox lit up. This is outrageous. I knew something smelled off. I gave them my key. What do I do now? Can we remove her? The PDF was spreading like wildfire. By 7:45, Gerald texted me a photo of Patricia standing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, looking like she'd swallowed a mouthful of gravel. Evan and I watched the same scene unfold from our porch. Patricia pacing, gesturing sharply, then disappearing into her SUV like retreat was her only move. She was trying to get ahead of it, but the truth was already ahead of her. I grabbed my own printed folder and slipped it into a black leather binder. Time to prep the final piece. Evan nodded. We're presenting today? No. I looked at the clock. We're planting today. The community center didn't open until 9 o'clock, but we got there by 8:15 and taped a single letter to the inside of the glass door, a public notice announcing our motion for a special election, citing Article 11.4. Beside it, we taped the front page of the evidence packet and a QR code linking directly to the PDF. No drama, no confrontation, just quiet truth, staring everyone in the face before Patricia could spin it. Then we split up. Evan took the east side of the neighborhood, door drops only, 1 folder per porch, no confrontation, no knocks. I took the west. By 9:30, 52 homes had received physical copies. By 9:45, the HOA emergency session was less than an hour away, and the community center parking lot was already starting to fill. I returned home, watching through the front window as a few board members walked the sidewalk, their eyes scanning porches, their pace brisker than usual. They knew. I saw Diane pull up just before 10 o'clock. She didn't look at anyone, just walked inside, holding her own folder tight to her chest. Evan returned a few minutes later, face flushed from the sun, but expression calm. Everyone's seen it, he said. I even heard two guys arguing about whether Patricia should step down or be investigated. Good, I said. We're almost there. I opened the backup hard drive, copied the key files onto 2 USBs, and sealed one in an envelope labeled for Oversight Liaison, Confidential. I tucked the second into my jacket pocket. It wasn't just a plan anymore. It was a machine, and it was running. I pulled out the same notebook Sarah had once written in. Taped inside was a quote she'd loved. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. But this wasn't about tomorrow anymore. This was about now, about finally pushing back, not with rage, not with shouting, but with precision, with law, with the kind of force that can't be silenced because it doesn't need to yell. It just moves. Patricia had the power of position. I had the power of truth. And after today, only one of those would still be standing. By the time Evan and I walked into the community center, it was already standing room only. The emergency HOA session had drawn the largest crowd I'd seen in years. Couples who never attended meetings, young parents with strollers, retirees in tennis shoes, all packed into the beige hall, eyes bouncing between the laminated agenda on the wall and the large QR code someone had printed and taped to the sign-in table. Someone had beaten us here, and they'd printed our evidence. Patricia sat at the front of the room in a tailored navy blazer, gavel in front of her, lips pursed tight. Diane sat 3 seats down, her folder unopened, hands folded neatly but tensely in her lap. At exactly 10 a.m., Patricia cleared her throat and raised the gavel. This emergency session will now come to order. We are here today to address... Point of order, I said clearly from the second row. The room hushed instantly. Patricia froze, hand midair. Mr. Landry, she said tightly, you'll have an opportunity to speak after the initial announcements. I move to introduce a special election motion under Section 11.4 of the HOA Charter, citing abuse of board authority and procedural fraud. A ripple moved through the crowd like a silent gasp. Patricia's face didn't move, but her fingers curled tighter around the gavel. That is not on the agenda, she said. It doesn't need to be, I replied. Section 11.4 allows for immediate introduction of removal motions upon evidence of misconduct. The board and every homeowner received that evidence this morning at 7 a.m. Murmurs turned into whispers. Patricia tried to regain control. That motion is based on misinterpreted information and unverified documents. I raised my voice, not shouting, just enough to cut through. The September board meeting minutes were never submitted. The master key policy was never voted on. Diane Mallory, the sitting secretary, confirmed this, verbally and in writing. All eyes turned to Diane. She didn't speak, not yet. But she opened her folder, took out a single page, and handed it silently to the board member beside her. Then she stood. I hereby confirm, she said, voice steady, that no vote was held. The minutes were fabricated. I refused to sign them. I should have said something sooner. Dead silence. Patricia's expression cracked for the first time. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gerald raised his hand from the back. Second the motion. A woman to my left stood. Third, a man near the door. Fourth. The momentum was rolling now. Patricia had lost the room, and she knew it. This is a coordinated smear, she snapped. You're all falling for manufactured chaos from one man with a vendetta. Then why didn't you submit the September minutes? I asked. The secretary failed to? Because you typed them yourself, Diane cut. Her voice sharper now, and told us you'd retroactively log the vote. You bypassed the board, the membership, and the charter. Gasps. No more murmurs, just sharp, audible reactions. One woman from the first row stood up. You tried my back gate last week. I saw you. You had no right. Patricia's face turned red. Enough, she said, slamming the gavel. This meeting is adjourned pending legal review. But before she could rise, Evans stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of her. County Oversight Liaison, he said. They've already received everything. You'll be hearing from them. Patricia stared at the envelope like it might explode. The board didn't move, but the crowd did. Homeowners gathered around Diane, around me, around each other. The walls that kept people silent had cracked wide open. Patricia stood slowly, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Her reign had ended not with drama, but with documentation, with process, with law. And we weren't finished yet. The special election took place 2 weeks later. No speeches, no flyers, no campaigns. Just a quiet vote held at the community center, under supervision from the county liaison and 2 attorneys, one of whom Patricia herself had hired, and who looked about as thrilled to be there as she did. I watched from the back corner, binder in hand, while residents trickled in with ballots and tight expressions. Some nodded toward me, others offered quick, grateful glances. But most didn't say anything at all. They didn't have to. Patricia sat near the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. She wasn't campaigning anymore. She wasn't posturing. She just waited, like someone pacing out the last steps before a sentence was read aloud. Diane sat beside her, but 1 seat over. Not a word passed between them. By noon, the votes were counted. The board's vice president, a quiet man named Reed Alston, stood up to deliver the results. He cleared his throat once, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room. By a margin of 84-12, he said, the community has voted to remove Patricia Hensley from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. No applause, no cheers, just exhaled silence, like the neighborhood itself had been holding its breath for weeks and could finally let go. Patricia stood, collected her purse, and walked out of the room without a single backward glance. No goodbyes, no statement. Just silence. A few people followed her with their eyes. Most didn't bother. Diane rose next, but she didn't leave. She walked to the podium. I know I stayed silent longer than I should have, she said, voice low but unwavering. And I know trust takes time to rebuild. I've submitted my resignation as well, but I'll remain on the record for any legal inquiries moving forward. Someone in the crowd called out softly, "Thank you." She nodded, stepped down, and left the hall through the side door. Reed took the podium again. Until a new president is appointed, I'll be serving as interim. Our first priority will be reviewing the master key policy and all other pending enforcement rules to ensure full compliance with both state law and community charter. That's when Gerald stood up. I move we rescind the master key policy entirely, retroactively. Second, someone said behind me. Third, echoed another voice. Reed nodded. Motion carried, effective immediately. Just like that, it was over. The lock on my front door meant something again. I stepped outside into the cool fall air. Evan was waiting for me, arms folded, leaning against the hood of his truck. She gone? He asked. Gone? He nodded slowly. So, what now? I looked out over the neighborhood, the same sidewalk Sarah and I used to walk in the evenings, the yard she helped plant flowers in before the chemo took her strength, the oak tree that had watched it all. Now we rebuild. Neighbors were still filtering out of the hall behind us, talking in hushed tones that were more cautious than celebratory. This wasn't victory with banners or noise. It was repair. It was what came after. As we walked back home, Gerald jogged up behind us, a folded envelope in his hand. "County rep asked me to pass this to you," he said. "Said it's a copy of the formal record for your file." I took it, nodded. "Appreciate it." He lingered, then added, "We've all got you to thank for this. You started something." "No," I said. "Patricia did." He laughed. "Fair." We parted ways at the corner. When I got home, I walked straight to the backyard and sat on the bench beneath the oak. Evan didn't follow. He knew this moment wasn't for talking. I ran my hand over the armrest where Sarah's blanket used to sit, where she'd leaned her head when the wind was kind and the birds were active. I whispered, "It's still ours." And this time, no one had the key but me. A week after the election, the neighborhood began to sound different. Not quieter, just lighter. The tension that had lived in every porch glance and every cautious HOA email had lifted, replaced by something softer. People talked again. Lawns looked less manicured, but more lived in. Someone painted their mailbox bright blue, and no one complained. For the first time in years, the rules felt like they belonged to the people, not the other way around. I walked the block alone that morning, the cold bite of fall curling under my sleeves. Evan had left the day before, back to North Carolina for a new contract job. Before he left, he stood on the porch, looked back at the front door, and said, "Feels different now." He was right. I passed by Lisa Tanner's home. Her wind chimes were out again. the ones the HOA told her to take down due to noise complaints. Now they rang freely and Bijivaha, the wind, delicate and defiant. Farther down, Gerald was repairing the trellis along his fence, finally allowed to finish the project Patricia had shut down months ago for unauthorized aesthetic deviation. At the end of the street, the community notice board had been stripped bare. No fines, no threats. Just a handwritten thank you card taped dead center. To whoever stood up first, thank you. Some of us were just waiting for a reason. I stood there for a long time. Back home, I made tea and took it out to the backyard bench. The oak stood strong overhead, its leaves just starting to turn. The bench creaked under my weight, same as always. But the silence around me wasn't heavy this time. It was whole. I ran my hand along the grain of the bench. Sarah would have been proud. Not just because we won, not just because we stayed within the lines of the law, but because the house, the tree, the bench, everything that mattered was still ours. Still untouched by those who thought power was permission. That's what people forget about these fights. They're not about fences or mailboxes or keys. They're about what those things mean: control, consent, memory, peace. And sometimes it takes someone with just enough fight left in them to remind the rest that we don't have to trade dignity for compliance. We just have to know the rules better than the people who abuse them. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the grass. I stood, took a deep breath, and turned toward the house. The front door gleamed in the light. Locked, untouched, mine. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Your story might be the next one. Someone else needs to finally fight back.